I've played numerous gacha games, Genshin Impact being the primary one that's covered on this channel currently. However, previously I covered Arknights and Blue Archive. Keeping this in mind, I do want to discuss how these games have changed compared to where they are now, meaning how they were back when they first launched. For some games like Arknights, I can't exactly speak for the game's first launch because I didn't play back then. So let's talk about how popularity has changed Genshin, Arknights, and Blue Archive. Now, right off the bat, I want to clarify, I don't think any of these games have gotten worse, at least from a blunt standpoint. They've made quality of life improvements over time, and they've all have gotten better to a degree. Instead, something that I think we need to keep in mind is that as a game grows, so too does the negative community with it. What could be 1 to 2 people for a game with 1,000 people playing it now is much larger, up to a couple thousand when the game gets 1 million players. I haven't played all these games to the exact same amount. I do play them, I do legitimately enjoy them, but your experiences may be different from mine, so please take everything I say with a grain of salt. First and foremost, we're going to start off with a heavy hitter, and that being Genshin Impact. It's the largest, most well-known gacha game, despite not necessarily being the oldest on this list or the youngest. We've seen dramatic quality of life changes from this game over time, from small things like an artifact strongbox system to different improvements to characters alongside supports, character quests, hangouts, bounties, teapot, the card game, so on. I think from a basic standpoint, the game has improved a lot from launch. There's a lot more content overall, and there's a lot more just in general in terms of the roster of units and what they actually do. One of the negatives you could point to is the increased size and the general accessibility of Genshin Impact, being that it's available on PC, mobile, you have consoles as well, means to dragging in a much wider audience than any other game, because I do believe it's a lot more difficult to convince someone to either install an emulator or play a gacha game on their phone than it is to say, hey, here's an actual game that you can just download on your PlayStation. And to that same effect, you also have individuals who aren't used to gacha games that come to it expecting an entirely different experience and are ultimately left disappointed. Maybe not in the game itself, but in the gacha aspect. A good example of this is content creators like MTash. He's an individual who's not used to gacha games exclusively, but has and still continues to play Genshin Impact despite the fact that he does have issues with it. I think that the large size of Genshin Impact does gather it a bit more hate than it actually deserves. But I also believe that the size of the community means that it has a much larger negative community than others. However, if you're starting out as a new player, there's a wealth of guides, a wealth of resources in terms of the content creators you have access to, in terms of the old and new guides, in terms of the different systems you can play with. I think that new players have a dramatically different experience than older players. If you want an update on more recent situations, please take a look at my previous videos on 4 stars, 5-star weapons, and 5 stars in general. Moving swiftly on, we have Arknights. I have done 2 relatively recent reviews on this game, one after I had played it for a while and decided to quit, and then one that was about a month later for me, but a couple weeks later for you, and it's mostly just my experience while playing. I spent a solid week playing the game consistently just to solidify my experiences. If either one of those 2 videos interest you, go click on the link that'll be either in the description or popping up on screen somewhere. With that being said, I can't speak once again on how the game was at launch, but I do feel like the game does have a bit of an iffy reputation. The community grows and the game is consistent and is good. However, what this subsequently means is that new players are usually led into it with one of 2 aspects or 2 opinions. You either have individuals who are told directly by the Arknights community to come play the game, and if they do, they might have a different experience. This could dramatically depend on how often or how highly this story is talked up. The other opinion is individuals see more of the drama surrounding it, not necessarily the community, but its interactions with other communities or the opinions of other creators on the game. This could leave individuals walking into the game with a more negative perception that could realistically be easily changed if they do enjoy the gameplay, or at least have positive interactions. In terms of gameplay and legitimate quality of life features, I do believe it's improved. You have annihilation tickets right now. I think the UI has gotten slightly better in certain aspects, such as level ups. You even have beginners getting introduced to a bunch of new resources early on. I do think a negative in its regard is that the new player experience hasn't fully been adjusted to account for all the different types of operators and branches you now have in the game. But the large size of the community can really work to explain a lot of the concepts that aren't explained to you. Overall, I think it's gotten better since release. I think the additional information and resources to new players, such as the operator selected tickets, are wonderful. In regards to Blue Archive, as this is the last game on the list, I played it since its original launch and I do enjoy it. I like the addition of pretty much all of the characters going to standard. It does mean that even if you do get spooked by a unit, you do have an opportunity to pick up a new one, which is really, really nice. I think the improvement to the story and the fact that you can re-experience past stories and events if you've played them does make it really good for refreshing your memory in the event that you maybe skipped something or maybe haven't played in a long time. I think there are some minor improvements here and there, but nothing like a large-scale redesign or a brand new system. You have scrimmage, you have bounties which are already there. joint firing drill, which is there, but I don't personally use. I think, at least from a basic standpoint, this game has not changed dramatically from its original launch. I do think there have been improvements here and there, and small ones, and the community has definitely grown. Regardless, I think all of these games are well worth playing in the event that you have the free time. I do believe from a casual perspective, Blue Archive and Arknights do exceed that, meaning that you really don't need to put much effort into the games themselves. And in regards to how easy they are to play on your phone, I would say both Blue Archive and Arknights have that in their pocket. With Blue Archive being much more of an autoplay thing, it kind of plays out for you, and you can sweep in Arknights requiring a bit more of attention, but you do need to keep your phone open for auto deploy. I think that each of these offer a full experience. If you're looking at Genshin Impact, it's an open world game, and even though you have resin, and which is the equivalent to like the stamina system or the sanity system in the other two games, it is still a pretty neat experience that you don't necessarily need resin to do anything. Don't get me wrong, you do have aspects of your account or your characters that are locked towards resin or your AR rank. However, everything else in the open world does contribute to that, whether that be finding random talent books, finding random weapons, or killing mobs. They do drop material that you will need to level up characters. This, as a result, means that even though you have sanity or even though you have a stamina system, it's not the most important, as a lot of it does come down to just simply grinding for materials in the open world itself. I think each of these offer a whole different experience compared to one another, whether it's tower defense, whether you prefer the characters and story from Blue Archive, which is the relationship storylines, which I find to be the primary appeal of that game, or you prefer the open world system and combat style of Genshin Impact. As a result, if you don't like one, it's not necessarily indicative of not liking the others. I do think the communities themselves does make a dramatic difference with each of these, so my personal recommendation would be to play the game first, disregard the community of each of them as a whole, and then slowly return and ask or maybe talk to the community to see what your general opinion is. I think if you go in the reverse fashion, you may either have high expectations or may go in there with a negative mindset already. In terms of the negatives of each of these, I do think that the higher time commitment required to Arknights, not necessarily in terms of the actual gameplay, but more so just due to farming and resource management, does make it a bit more difficult to recommend to people with a lot less time than something like Blue Archive. Primarily this is due to the sweep function. I'm not considering Genshin Impact in that niche because Genshin does require a lot more time in general. Since you don't have the option of sweeping or auto deploying, you actually have to commit and do each stage or each run of a domain. In terms of account progression, I think Blue Archive has the most linear progression, and Genshin Impact does to a degree as well, alongside Arknights. The ease of progression, however, I would have to say goes to Blue Archive, because all the materials you need are found either in events or in stages you're naturally going to do anyway. And with the sweep function, it makes it pretty simple just to do like 30 runs at once. As a result, Blue Archive is the easiest to progress your account upwards and all your characters upwards, especially given that every time you summon you get an LF regardless of the character, which can then be used to turn into an LF of your favorite character and get them to max stars. This removes the need entirely for pulling for multiple copies yourself unless you just want to speedrun the process. And I think it also excels in terms of the characterization of every individual, because the game hinges so much on the story. The characters matter so much. Every unique individual either has their own relationship storyline and their own life duty, or their own relationship storyline, life duty, and a separated alt outfit as well. Characters like Hifumi or Mitsuki are perfect examples, and you will find those in the beach or summertime storylines, which will be as events, either rerun or brand new ones. Overall, these are all great games. I do feel like the popularity has changed them to a dramatic degree, but the games themselves have steadily improved over time and most likely will continue to do so. I think if you're engaging with the community, please keep in mind that it's going to be a lot easier to find negative individuals as they grow over time, but I do think you just need to find the right section of the community or the right community in general, and you're going to have a very positive experience. I comfortably recommend either of these, even though I don't play one of them, and the other one is kind of iffy on if I play it or not. Either way, subscribe if you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.